We started looking at David, but this is before he's king. He's been anointed as to be the king, but this is before he actually is. Saul is still the king, and we began last week by looking at chapter 16, verses 14 to 23, and I just want to read it. We really covered the first couple of verses here, mainly last week. Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. And Saul's servant said to him, Behold, now an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful in playing the lyre. And when the evil spirit from God is upon you, he will play it, and you will be well. So Saul said to his servants, Provide for me a man who can play well, and bring him to me. One of the young men answered, Behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing. A man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him. Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, Send me David your son who is with the sheep. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread and a skin of wine and a kid, and sent them by David his son to Saul. And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Let David remain in my service, for he has found favor in my sight. And whenever the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. We actually looked at verses 14 through 16 last week, and if you want to, you can pick up the CDs that are out there on the wall out there in terms of that. We dealt with really the evil spirit, but we also talked about God's Spirit departing from us and what that means. And the fact is that Saul didn't even know that it happened, that the Spirit of God had been removed from him, and then it was on David. Anyway, we talked about that and about your heart and keeping your diligence. This is actually the second half of this in terms of this scripture. I want to start with the vehicle of music is the way in which God uses David's life to promote him. And I want to talk about that skill in just a second, but if you read the Bible, there are people who get raised up on occasion in the Bible, and David got raised up because of his talent. He was skillful with the lyre, and he probably could sing too, and everything. He played well. In the story of Joseph in the latter part of Genesis, when Joseph is down in prison, what gets him promoted is the fact that he can interpret dreams and for certain people. And then he gets raised up, brought out of prison. What we know about David here is that he was skillful in the use of the lyre, which is like Old Testament guitar. He knew his instrument. Now, in the Star Wars movies, and of course we got one coming out pretty soon, in order to be a Jedi, one of the requirements for being a Jedi is the fact that you can fashion your own weapon. You have to be able to get your lightsaber and build your own lightsaber, and that's kind of like the people that are in the army, men that are in the army that have to build their own weapon. They take it apart and put it back together, I don't know how many thousands of times, in order to know their weapon. Well, David was skillful in guitar, I guess is what I would say that he is. He played guitar. And I have a son like that. My son John, when he was 15 years old, decided to get a guitar. Actually, I think he was 13. How old was he, 12? 13 years old. He decided that he was going to learn the guitar, and he did it himself, and he practiced on that thing. And the only difference between my son John and David was he had an amp. But he taught himself, and he did it a lot, and he practiced it all by himself, and he finally said, I need to take some lessons. And the reason he wanted to take some lessons was he wanted to find out if he was any good at it, and he wanted to pick up any intricacies that he may have missed, and so he took guitar for a year. But the guy already told him, he says, he plays pretty good. You don't have me to teach you. And he said he just wanted to pick up a few things. Well, David's out there by himself with the sheep, and probably he learned skills. Well, we know about the skills of using the sling, and when he kills Goliath, and we'll be talking about that in the next few times that we have this thing. But he also had time to practice his skill in terms of music. Now, he had some talent, probably God-given talent. It's what I always say, you can't teach somebody something if there is no potential there. He had to have potential. But he taught himself. And he's probably out there between throwing rocks or slinging rocks at sheep occasionally, little ones, just get that guy. But he's probably just plugging around, playing, finger things and doing stuff out there. He doesn't know that he's destined for the throne of Israel. He doesn't know anything out there, just what he's doing. And he's got the gift of music. And he hones the talent. And he works on it out there. He probably doesn't think, well, it's never going to come to anything or anything like that. He just likes to play, and he's out there doing it. And the fact of the matter is, he doesn't get to the throne unless God does it. Now, the exposure and the promotion that takes place happens through the gift of music. Because of the gift of music and his talents and his hidden skills that he has, although they're not as hidden as you would think, he somehow gets into the presence of the king. Now, one of the things about this is you got to kind of read between the lines here a little bit. It's not just the songs that he would sing. I think it also has to do with the spirit with which he sings the songs and plays the songs. There is a difference in things. There's a difference in attitudes and how that works. It's not just the songs, but it was the spirit with which he did it as well. And that's the undefinable part of talent sometimes. I occasionally tune in to what are these America's Got Talent and The Voice and all that stuff. And, God, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of talent. But if you listen to that stuff, some are better than others. And how are they better? They're better in the way that they present it. And it really has to do with the spirit with which they do things. There's probably a lot of guitar pickers in Israel, but it has to do with the one who is playing and the spirit with which they do it. And he has the gift of music. He has a talent. And that is what is going to bring him to promotion in terms of who he is and where he's going to be. So, one of the things about this is it's not so much what you do, but it's the way you do it. Have you ever been to a restaurant and, we always have waitresses and waiters and stuff like that. I know I've been to enough restaurants. There have been times when there's just one waitress or someone who is just catches your attention and just kind of makes you smile. They got a warmth about them or something that they just do it right. And it has to do with they're not doing really anything different than other waitresses or waiters would do, but it's the way they do it. Is this right? Yes. You've had that happen to you, haven't you? You know, and there's something about David when he comes in. And one of the things that we know is that, if nothing else, back in verse 13 of the last of chapter 16, before that it says, the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. That's after he has been anointed by Samuel. And so when he comes in and he plays this stuff, it soothes the savage breast. By the way, that's the breast. It's not the beast, but we say the savage beast, but it actually soothes the savage breast. There's a blackness around Saul. It has to do with an evil spirit. His soul, you might say there's madness in the tent. Or you could say, if we were talking about, could be madness in the Oval Office. And David gets brought in there to, in other words, to soothe that savage beast, to soothe that, to drive off that evil spirit. Now, you and I know music affects you. Does it not affect you? I mean, you get an upbeat song, but it kind of brings you to life. If you hear a melancholy song, it'll do things to you in terms of that. And I can name songs that do this stuff. Some songs lift you up. Some songs drag you down. Some songs give you memories. Well, Saul, and at that time, they did not have the ability to have a turntable, a tape player, or a CD player. They didn't have radio stations or anything like that. They had nothing. What they had is that, let's go find this guy, he can play, and bring him in. And so that's what they did. You know, today we get in the car, turn the radio on, or turn a CD on, or whatever. We can go home and do it. And we can do it all the time, and we do it all the time. But back then, they did not have that ability. And so that kind of brings to front what these guys are doing. They say, let's go find somebody that can soothe this man's madness. And they knew that music worked. And so that's what they did. They went out looking for a man who could play with skill and had the right spirit about him. Verses 17 and 18, that's really where we're picking up in terms of he said, verse 16, let our Lord now command your service, and he does that. So Saul said to his servant, provide for me a man who can play well and bring him to me. And that's what it says right there. In verse 18, one of the young men answered, behold, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him. Now, these guys, the servants around Saul, are the ones who pick up on the fact that there's an evil spirit. You know, I don't care who you're around. If you can pick up on people when their soul is cast down. I can be around people and I can know pretty quick. And some of you have been a recipient. I can tell you when there's something bothering that person. I can feel it. I can smell it. I can sense it about them. You may not know what it is, but you know there's something there. And if you're in a workplace with other people, if you're in a church with other people, if you're in social groups with other people, more than likely you can pick up on what's going on, at least in terms of general things, by their countenance. And these guys picked up on that, and they said, we need to find somebody to do this. And so they just raised up, says, we can provide you a person who can play. And Saul, you notice what Saul says. He doesn't really care who it is. Go get somebody for me. He's in that kind of place where he just says, whatever, go find somebody to do this. Now, one of the things about these stories that you need to understand, and one of the things that you need to understand about your own life and the people around you is, there is a missing person in the picture of your life. There's a missing link, you might say. And that missing link is God. You know, they're not talking anything about God. These servants aren't. They're just talking about Saul and his madness and all this. But the thing that is missing here is you need to read into these stories is that God is using this circumstance to work to raise David up so that he can be the man he's supposed to be as king. And in that picture, it's kind of like, remember the bees. There's always more going on than meets the eye. The presence of God in the picture. And it's one of the things that if I could instill into you, it says, always remember that in the circumstance, the situations, the journey of your life, God is the one that is behind the scenes. And in some instances, you may be like these servants and you're trying to help somebody else out. Or you could be like Saul and be in a mess, some kind of mad. You could be like David. But you could place yourself in these things. In your life, right now, God is working. And he may be engineering things in terms of what you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to do in terms of ministries, maybe in terms of your finances, maybe in terms of your relationships. It's all kinds of stuff. And this is what the missing link in this picture. So you have this guy, he says, I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who knows the son of Jesse. And what we've heard is that this guy's pretty good at playing a liar. Plus, everybody kind of likes him, and he's been impressive to us. And so this stuff kind of goes down the line like this. And in our lives, these same things kind of happen to us. And it's the presence of God in these pictures. Now, you describe six things about David in this one verse. Now, they're living out their lives. Everybody here is living out their lives. And David doesn't get to where he needs to be unless God helps out. And so it's just a series of people. And then they describe David. This guy says, one of the young men answered. He says, hey, by the way, I know this guy, David. Behold, I have seen the son of Jesse the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a man of good presence, and the Lord is with him. By the way, you notice he doesn't even mention David's name, because he may not know David's name. He says, I know a guy. And if you look at these things, how does David get described? By the way, somebody is always watching. He says, well, for one thing, he's skillful. He's skillful as a musician. We know that. He's good at that. Then they say he's a man of valor. Well, how do they know that? And how would that come about? Well, that might have to do with when he was out in the wilderness taking care of the sheep, because he mentions it in the next chapter. Every so often he had to deal with a beast that came after him, a bear or a lion or something came after the sheep. And so he did that. Maybe there's other things that we don't know that aren't written in Scripture that he has shown his strength, his prowess. So he's mentioned as a mighty man of valor. They also call him a warrior. Well, you know what? He hasn't done anything in war that we know of at this point in time. They once again may be referring to some of the things that he's had to deal with, just keeping the sheep out there in the wilderness. We don't know. But somebody has noticed these things. It also says prudent in speech. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's he knows how to hold his tongue. If somebody tells him something, he doesn't go blabbing it out to everybody around him. He is discretionary in terms of what he talks about with other people in terms of that. And so they know that that means he can probably be trusted with a secret. if he's prudent in speech. This might be very good, especially in the presence of the leader of the nation. So he's prudent in speech. He knows how to hold his tongue. It says, next thing it says is that, where are you? A man of good presence. What does that mean? Well, that means he's kind of handsome, but he's got an air about him. You can tell he's got an attitude. He's got a good presence. In other words, people will generally like this guy because, well, he's got a good presence. He's probably handsome, and they called him ruddy looking. So there's those things. And this just has to do with appearance and attitude and things that he has been doing in his life when probably nobody's paying attention except somebody's paying attention. And finally, and the Lord is with him. The Lord is with him. Oh. You know, there are people in our lives that we come across every so often and say, you know, I think the Lord's with that person. Over the years, every so often, I'll meet somebody, and I have a lot of traffic around me over the years because of the banquet and people that I don't know, and there's just been a lot of traffic. And every so often, there's somebody that shows up in my presence, and I said, you know, I don't think you better mess with this one. I think this one's favored by God. And I just say that to myself, and it's just what I seem to pick up about them. Has nothing to do with their station in life, in reality, or their age or anything like that. It has to do with there's just something about them. And the Lord is with him. And that's what they know about David. Somehow they pick up on that. And it says that the Spirit had come upon him, but you know, even before that, I think there's something about him. And out of those 6 things, what we also need to remember is somebody is always watching. Somebody is always watching you. You are always watching somebody else. I know, in fact, as being pastor of a church, somebody is always watching. And so we need to understand this truth. And the second thing about this is that God is the hidden player in this whole thing. And God is the hidden player in your life as well as mine. And we need to recognize that truth all the time. What is God working here? By doing that, you pay attention and you're more intentional about your living, because you say, well, you know, I need to back up and just take a gander at this. Now, principle that you have here is never, ever discount anything that you have done or been in your past. David's out there plucking on the guitar. You know, God uses that in incredible ways here in this story. He's out there playing Kumbaya or something in the field, and he hasn't met Saul. He doesn't know who Saul is. He knows that this preacher came along one day. It was kind of like the Billy Graham of the country by the name of Samuel. Comes along one day and eats a meal with Jesse and all the boys, and says, well, you're the one, I'm anointing you. And I'm going, wow, what does that mean? You know? And so he's out there, and he's just living his life. And he uses the skills that God has given to him. In this instance, it's the music skills. Verse 19, therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me David your son who is with the sheep. Notice this. There are no reasons given. Hey, just get this guy, bring him in here. It's kind of like Cinderella. There's no reasons given. The president has called, and he says, I want you to come into my presence. No reason given whatsoever at all. And it's really weird. And the thing about this is, Samuel has anointed David earlier. Big deal. So what? You get the minister coming around your house or something like that, and he said, well, I would just want to pray for you. Basically, well, and he says, oh, I got a word for you from God. And so you tell him, and then you say, well, what the hell? Blow him off. And that's what you do. So I got to go on living my life. And so you do. And so you got to think about that in terms of Samuel coming there. Now, Samuel was a little bit higher than just the local preacher, but even so, if you're Jesse and the boys, and he said, well, what was that all about? I mean, really, And so they're nice to the preacher and everything, and he comes in there and he anoints him, and they said, well, that may mean something or something else. We don't know what that means. That's fine and dandy, but we got a king already, and what's he going to be doing? And so they just blow off what he does, and they don't think about it much. Verse 20. And Jesse took an ass laden with bread and a skin of wine and a kid and sent them by David his son to Saul. In other words, here he loads up a donkey with a lot of gifts and David, and it gives him a goat and a jug of wine and some grapes. And can you see David? He's got the guitar slung over his shoulder, and he's going into, it's like he's going into Nashville. Going to Music City. Anyway. Remember the bees. Those of you, if you don't know the story, ask somebody. Nobody knows what's coming. Nobody knows what's coming. David knows that he had this preacher come by one day. Jesse knows that he had this preacher come by one day. But we don't know anything else. Nobody knows what's coming. We don't know what's coming in terms of our lives as well. The missing person in the picture is God in your life. And God judges things. By the way, we talked about the way that God judged Saul and basically lifted his spirit. I talked about this last week, and the way that he judged him was because of the way Saul judged things. But God judges people. And we always think about that in terms of negative terms, but God judges people like David too. And says, he's the one. And in some place, you may be the one that God is. And so he sheds his grace on you in terms of that particular area. And you may just be going along in your life doing stuff, and it says, this is how God works, by the way. He really does work this way. He takes an ancient skill that David has. In this case, it's music. Something you like doing, but in many ways you say, well, it's just kind of a wasted kind of thing that you just keep doing, but you like doing it, but it doesn't see, it's not going to pay any money or anything like that. So you just go on and do it. And then God somehow, when he puts you into that situation, that circumstance, that job, that place, that skill or what you were doing becomes very helpful in terms of how you do things. Nothing, never discount anything that you have done, even if it's just piddly stuff. Now, I'll give you a good example of this, and maybe it's a bad example to you, I don't know. But if you're hanging around this place, I take movies and I rework them and I show you stuff out of that has to do with how God, everybody knows this? Well, I did that a long time before I ever did it with you. Because when I watch movies, for some reason, I like to look and read them between the lines in terms of what's going on. And I've always been looking for the deeper things that are going on, because they're stories, they're like parables, and they have a point to them. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them have a point to them, and you don't pick it up if you're not paying attention. So I've always done that. And what I came to find out is a lot of them have to do with the scriptures that's out there. Some of them have to do with the Christ story and stuff like that. And I just did it. You know, it was just something that I just noticed I was doing when I would watch movies and stuff like that. And by the way, you don't get the ones that don't have to do with Scripture. One of the movies that I could never preach about, but which I would love to do a course on, is The Natural with Robert Redford in it. Because that is an ancient story. But I don't do it because, well, it hasn't anything to do with what I do up here. But it's something that God gave me. The ability to see into movies, dreams, scripture, stuff like that. So, out of this, God takes the stuff of your life. And I don't know what that is, but you know what it is, the stuff of your life. And it becomes the vehicle leading to destiny and purpose and fulfillment. It is the mode of transportation. Those things that God has given you, those things that you do, the stuff of your life, really are the vehicle that He uses in terms of the journey of your life. And maybe it has to do with the mission of your life. Maybe it has to do with ministries that God gives you. And that second part of that is even the bad things. Some of us have really had bad things happen to us in terms of our lives. Now, these bad things can be because of our own sinfulness. We could be victims of the world around us. It could be just stuff that happens. Or we could be because of the sins of others. But there's bad things that have happened to people. And God can take the bad things as well, and out of the ruins of whatever that is, it becomes a place of glory in terms of how God uses things in terms of your life and gives meaning to things. And it's one of the things we should pick up about David is that he's been out there picking and grinning and doing what he does, and people have noticed. Verse 21, I think that's where we are. After he comes like a guy going to Nashville. And David came to Saul and entered his service, and Saul loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. David and Saul have never met. David doesn't say, oh, by the way, I'm here to take your place. David has been anointed by Samuel to be king of Israel. He knows that. He knows things that Saul doesn't know. But what he does is he may know things. He knows things that Saul doesn't know, but he lets God open the doors. And boy, there's a principle there. Sometimes we know stuff. Sometimes we know stuff about what's going on in terms of how God has shown us things and everything. And we may know things, but he lets God open the doors for him here. Rather than engineering it himself or even thinking about it, because you don't get that from David. But, you know, some people do. Some people engineer things as best as they can, but he just lets God open the doors in terms of things. And that's where you say, you know, who's really in charge here? Am I in charge, or is God in charge of my life? Is God really the Lord of the universe or not? Now, I want to put this into what we do as people in terms of our lives, because we watch a picture here. It's a story of a person's life. So we're watching David, and he doesn't presume anything here. And Saul doesn't have a clue what's going on. He's a madman. In your places, I don't know, a lot of times it has to do with your job place, where you work, maybe your businesses, maybe a school where you teach or something like that. Are you trying to take somebody else's place? Do you have ambitions in terms of things? I've been involved in churches for 45 years, and I've been on the committee of ministry for 15 of those years, and that has to do with churches and pastors and all that goes on in churches. And by the way, churches are as sinful as people are, and I've always believed that the difference between heaven and hell, it's all in the management. But I mean, I've dealt with it, and I've watched it in myself and things like that. Pastors, associate pastors, and the palace politics that can happen in the context of churches. This has to do with the things that go on in staff and all that kind of stuff. And it just happens, and I watch it. It's palace politics is what I call it. You know, bosses and employees who are on the same plane with one another, employees who are over other employees, and all that goes on in terms of all the palace politics that can happen in office places. And you know what I've discovered over the years? People are no good. That's why Jesus died. And that includes you and me. And I watch palace politics in churches, and I watch palace politics in businesses, and I've heard some of your stories and everything. And I'm here to tell you that this kind of story here relates. You see, David's coming in. He's going to be Saul's replacement. But he does not presume. He lets God open the doors. You got to remember the person that's not in the picture, the one that is taking the picture, and that's God in terms of things. You know, do you have a subservient role where you work? Do you use your talents to serve other people? If you have a boss or maybe a business, do you make them look good? Do you support them in terms of how you do your job? What I know about us people is we like to push and manipulate and maneuver. And the question that we always need to ask at the bottom line of all that is either God's in charge or he isn't in charge. And if he is in charge, what's my role in all this? You know, because what we do is we manipulate and maneuver and we do those kinds of things. And then if you do get to be king of the hill, you know that somebody else is trying to take your place. And so you're always putting them down in terms of things. And you see everyone else like you because the way you judge the world is not the way the world is. The way you judge the world is the way you are. And I know we do these things. I've watched it happen. I've caught myself in these kinds of roles on occasion. If you try to take over, and that's your lens, then if you get in charge, you know what? You see others the way you are. It's just a principle. You know, I talked about Herod, the Herod spirit back in a few weeks ago in terms of that. That's what happened with him. He got in charge and he saw everybody else the same way he saw himself, which is, hey, if I were them, I'd try to kill me because I want to be king of the hill. And so that's what we do. The way you judge the world is not the way the world is. The way you judge the world is the way you are. And in this particular instance, we have an example where David comes in. He knows things that Saul doesn't know. And he just lets God open the doors and take care of things. Now, David serves Saul. And as we walk through Saul, the rest of this story of David and Saul, you're going to see how David serves an evil king. He serves a boss who wants to kill him. But he does it with loyalty and faithfulness. You know, I just talk to people. You may be your boss's successor. You know, he may not know it. And you've already been told that somehow by God or something, but he may not even know it. How are you going to serve? And it says here that Saul loved him greatly, verse 21, and he became his armor bearer. Saul did love him at first. Now, as I say, this is kind of important because as you look at this, who's in charge? Is it God? Is it David? Is it the manipulation of people? I mean, I watch a lot of TV programs, and a lot of TV programs, there's nothing about God in any of them, and it's all about the manipulation of people and all that goes on in terms of things. And it just kind of blows my mind because in reality, that's the way we really think most of the time, is it's all about us and it's all about horizontal thinking and there's no vertical thinking whatsoever in terms of life. But if you think that God is in charge of your life and everybody else's, then it behooves you to pay attention, to be intentional, to think about, with presence, about where you are in terms of life and your relationships with other people and all that. I want you to think, now David gets called up by the king. I want you to think about this. David is now in the right place to learn. He is in the right place to learn king stuff. You know, when I graduated from seminary, I don't know if I was wise or whether I was just lucky or blessed. But one of the things I thought about when I graduated from seminary, I wanted to go to a large church so I can watch how they run the things. Because I didn't know how to run a church. I mean, you go to seminary, they don't teach you how to run a church. So I went to the First Presbyterian Church in Morristown, Tennessee, as an associate pastor. And when I got there, the guy's first name was Pitzer. And my last name is Pitzer. And it was kind of like Pitzer and Pitzer. It's kind of like a law firm. And if they called up asking for Pitzer, no, we didn't know who they were asking for. But anyway, his first name was Pitzer. It's really strange. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, what I did is I went there with the intention of watching, observing, learning how to do things. Buddy, I took notes. This guy that I worked with, he was a tremendous church administrator. I would watch him, how he would handle things and all the things that he would do in terms of running, administrating a church. And there is a lot of stuff that is really behind the scenes in terms of how you do this. One of the things that he would do, and he was really good at this, sometimes we would go into a meeting, and for some reason, you come into that meeting, and the spirit of the meeting was sour, or just a bad attitude. And I've been in meetings like that here and down in Kentucky. But what he would do was, if he sensed that there was a sour spirit about the meeting and stuff, he would just cut it short. We wouldn't do any more than we had to, and he would cut it short, and he would get them back the next time when they're in a better mood. And that's administration, by the way. And I learned that. So I said, that's smart. And I asked him about it. He says, well, this is what I know. I said, well, if they're in a bad mood, you can't get anything good done, so you might as well cut it short. That's just one of the things that I learned from him. I learned how he worked with people and how he managed the workings of the things. Now, I also saw a few things that I said, well, I'm not sure that's really smart. But, you do that kind of stuff. And the other thing that I found out, he from the pulpit, he left quite a bit to be desired. He just wasn't there. But when it come to running a church, buddy, he knew how to do things. And so he would do that. And I just learned. And David is now in the place where he can learn king stuff. How to run a country, how to fight wars. Now, some of the stuff he's going to learn is probably not going to be that good. But he gets to make the decision, so he gets to see how things work. And let me tell you, knowing how things work is important. So David entered his service. He became his armor bearer. So he was in on a lot of discussions and stuff that was going on, and he was hanging around there. And Saul sent to Jesse, saying, "Let David remain in my servant, for he has found favor in my sight." I want to talk about favor for a few minutes. He finds favor in the sight of the king. Favor is a strange thing. I mean, I don't know how you define it, but I want to mix with this with a couple of other scriptures. In Exodus chapter 33, Moses is talking to God. You ever talk to God? You know you can. If you haven't, it's when God talks back to you, though, that's when you better pay attention. In Exodus chapter 33, verse 12, I'm just going to read it to you. Moses said to the Lord, "See, thou sayest to me, bring up this people, but thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found favor in your sight, show me now your ways, that I may know you and find favor in your sight." Moses finds favor in the sight of God. And what he says, well, if that's the case, here's what I want. I want you to teach me. I want you to teach me your ways. And so he works with God in terms of that. In other words, Moses was set apart by God to do a job, to manage his people for the 40 years out in the wilderness, to get them out of Egypt in the first place. And he gets set apart. So it's something special. If he's found favor, if you find favor in somebody's sight, that's a good thing. If you find favor in the sight of the king, think about this. David gets the king's ear. He gets the king's grace. He gets special treatment. You know, if you find favor in somebody's eyes, you get their ear. I mean, you can talk to them and say, can you help me with this? You get their grace. You get their special treatment. If somebody finds favor in you, and you say, "Oh, well, how do you treat them?" You know, I believe there were a lot of guitar pickers in Israel at that point in time. It's a strange thing that David gets picked out of all those guitar pickers. And then he finds favor. It's not what you know. It's who you know. Now, we've said that for years, haven't we? It's not what you know, it's who you know. Well, you know the truth is? That is the truth. It really is the truth. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And when it comes to your salvation, I know a lot of theological people who know a lot about the Bible and everything, but it is not what you know, it's who you know. If you don't know Jesus, I don't care what you know. The devil knew a lot. He finds favor, and it was granted to him, that kind of favor. So think about the people that you favor. in life and how you treat her. Think about who favors you in terms of your life as well. You get the king's ear, you get that kind of stuff. Let me give you another example. In Luke chapter 2, verse 52, it talks about Jesus. And it says this, "And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and men." So in other words, people began to show favor to him even as God was showing favor to him. If God shows you favor, he covers you. He'll keep you out of things that you shouldn't be in. He'll redeem you from things that you're already in. Let me give you another example. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. Because, where are you? Proverbs here, right after Psalm someplace. Chapter 3, verses 3 and 4. Now, wisdom. This is how you live your life, folks. The thing I get out of Proverbs, this is how you live life. It says this, "Let not loyalty and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them about your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man." Now let me give you those two things. David is a man after God's own heart. And somebody has said, well, what does that mean? Well, I'm going to give you two things that it has to do. David is loyal to Saul. He is loyal to a fault. And by the way, loyalty is the same as faithfulness. He sticks with Saul even when Saul turns against him. And this is what this is. "Let not loyalty and faithfulness forsake you." Do not let that stuff go. Bind it around your neck. That is around where you think, and write it on the tablet of your heart. If you say you're going to be loyal or faithful to something or someone or some group or something, do it. With your mind and your heart. Now, it's easy if you're always in sync with them or in sync with that group, but it's not always easy when you're not quite in sync with them. But this is important, so you'll find favor and good reputation. That's repute. In the sight of God and man, because as far as God's concerned, if you want to be after his heart, it has to do with loyalty. It has to do with faithfulness. When God talks about an adulterous people, we talk about adultery. Well, that's all adultery is breaking faith with another person. That's what it really is. And loyalty and faithfulness has to do with not breaking faith with people and doing those kinds of things. So the Proverbs is right because it talks about how David is going to be towards Saul when things are bad. Things aren't bad yet. So he does that. Now, how am I doing? Verse 23 here. Got to find the right Samuel. "And whenever the evil spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand. So Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him." Now, Saul, when he was in his madness, so David plays for him. I'll bet you 2 bits they also sang together. What do you think? I just think that there's some kind of camaraderie. They get bound together in this relationship because of 2 things. Love and need. You need to hear those 2 words, love and need. Some of you people are going to be ministers and agents of deliverance. See, that's what David was doing with Saul. He was delivering him from that evil spirit. And there are some of us that end up as agents and ministers of people, and we help deliver them from whatever, chaos, situations, circumstances, evil in their lives. And what happens when you do that is you become beloved by the person who is in need. It really does happen. You are beloved when you minister to people and you bring about deliverance in their life. In other words, you find favor with them. It really does happen. When you find favor, it really probably has to do with you have exercised some kind of deliverance or an agency of deliverance with somebody, and you found favor in their sight, and they probably love you in some form or fashion, but you have met a need for them. And that's what David is doing for Saul. He found favor because of love and need. Now, some of you need to understand this. If the Spirit of God rests upon you, and some of you probably, well, not me. Well, yeah. If the Spirit of God rests upon you, people pick up on that. They really do pick up on that. And what usually comes out of that is through ministry or whatever, you become an agent of God's Spirit in their life in some form or fashion, His love, and people pick up on that out of love and need. That's what you're seeing happen right here with David. He is ministering to the king. Some of you, I know you, so I know that you have ministered to people in your life. You've ministered to family, you've ministered to friends, you've ministered to people you work with. I know this. And because of that, a lot of you find favor in their sight. And it's because of love. It's because of they needed it. And that's all David's doing here. He's just picking and grinning with the king. And it's not about how well he sings the song or picks or grin. It has to do with his presence as well and what was going on. Okay, verse 23. And whenever the Spirit from God was upon him, David took his lyre, played it with his hand, so Saul was refreshed and was well, and the evil spirit departed from him. He was refreshed. These are the two things that happened to show how effective David's music was. He refreshed Saul, and the evil spirit would depart. Refresh. By the way, that term is kind of important. It means to be wide or spacious, to give space, to give relief. Let me ask you, have you ever needed your space? There are times that, I just need a little bit of space. Music created the space for Saul from the burdens of being king. Have you ever had music created space for you in terms of the burdens that you were carrying in terms of your life? Gave you a little bit of breathing room. That's what David was doing with his music. Music created that space, gave the king some breathing room. There's a lot of burdens when you are the king. And he was carrying a lot of burdens. Anybody here carrying burdens? Saul's got his. He's fighting battles for the kingdom that he runs. And you may be fighting battles for the kingdoms that you're in charge of. And Saul loved David because he gave him some space. I expect that the burdens that Saul was carrying was like being in a cage. You know, I do a lot of ministry down at the prisons. And one thing I've learned the first time I went to prison was just talking to these men that I was at down in Vienna, Illinois, is that not all prisons have bars on them. In fact, most prisons don't have bars on them. You ever got that caged feeling? When all you need to do is get a little bit of space for you, that's what it's doing. Now, right here. Let me give you a few things real quickly, and I'm going to go through them, and I'm not going to expound on them. The beauty and simplicity of the Lord is lost in the noise of life. Saul just needed somebody to sing him a song. The beauty and simplicity of the Lord is lost in the noise of life. Now, the second thing is, are you in spiritual backwater? You know, haven't been noticed you're shepherding out there like David. Third thing is this, the time of promotion, that's where you move into king things. God knows what he's doing. And I won't say the second half of that is, most of the time we don't know what we're doing. First off, the fourth thing is there's a time of patience. And during that time of patience, it is very important to be faithful in little things. Being faithful in little things. And what are little things? Well, gosh, they're so little. A lot of times we don't notice them. I think of a mother taking care and giving a baby a bath. That's a little thing in many ways. But you may be shaping somebody for the future. And the fifth thing is support that superior. That Saul in your life. You know, what did he have? He had soft music for a black heart. Because he was he had madness in him. Do you have a Saul in your life right now? A king? I mean, we are all kings in our own way. Do you have somebody that seems to be there with a madness in them? What kind of music skill do you bring to that kind of situation? To refresh or to drive away the madness? Maybe you are a Saul. Maybe there's a little madness in you. Do you have a David around you? How do you receive him or her in terms of how you work things? I'm going to leave you with this because David is a man who's going to be king. He's a man who God places in a place where he can learn. He's placed with a boss who's nuts. And he is called to live in that for a while. And he brings his presence and his skills and his talents into that situation. And God is the one who is taking the picture and engineering everything. And that's true of our lives as well in various ways. Always remember the one behind the scenes. Let's pray.